Welcome back to Thrive the Matrix, where we talk about strategies for us to effectively live after being red-pilled in reality with the narcs and controllers in our lives. I am going to switch up my introduction today. I want to pay homage to my new favorite YouTuber, Christina Randall. I'll put a link to her channel in the description. She focuses on true crime. Absolutely love her opening. Want to take my own shot at it, follow with my own disclaimers, and then we'll get into today's content. So let's just remember, folks, this information is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Please be kind in your home, your everyday life, and the grocery store, and especially below in the comment section. Please don't show hate to anybody, anywhere. My lovelies, my beauties, my friends. My name is Andy, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, thank you for clicking on this video. I invite you to stick around, take a chance, subscribe, listen to a few things that I have to say. And if you are a returning subscriber, you already know. Y'all are my babies. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How is everybody doing today? I'm hoping you're having a wonderful weekend, and I'm glad to be back with you. I know I mentioned subscribing, but as I always do, if you enjoy this content, please hit the like button. This ensures that YouTube pushes this content out to others that may value it or enjoy it. Other disclaimer, not a psychiatrist, psychologist, clinician, therapist, or life coach, although I'm an aspiring life coach and I'll keep you posted on how that's going. So on this channel, we always theorize, we never diagnose. With that said, we're going to continue our series today on I'm a Narc, Get Me Out of Here, which is my little play on that reality show, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So we're going to be looking at a celebrity that I've selected, giving a little bit of background on this celebrity, and then we're going to take a look at the DSM-5 to see if they match at least 5 of the 9 criteria they need to get the possible diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, or if they're somewhere on the spectrum of NPD. So I'm not hoping to provide a definitive diagnosis that would hold up in court. This is only for us to speculate and learn more about NPD and how it affects our lives. So today's celebrity is Ghislaine Maxwell. But I think Ghislaine Maxwell is fascinating, and I think she's going to be very interesting as we continue this discussion. So a little bit of background. I'll always provide the background first. If I'm unsure of a date or a minor detail, I'll let you know. And then we'll move on to the DSM-5. We'll go down the list. I'll try to name a behavior or two that supports or does not support my thoughts on whether or not that criteria applies. And then we will have our analysis at the end. So let's get started. So Ghislaine Maxwell was born in 1961. She was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a publishing magnate. Needless to say, they wanted for nothing. They had a ton of money. He was incredibly successful, very shrewd, a very good businessman, and Ghislaine Maxwell was just one of 5 or 6 children. She was widely considered a favorite of her father's, so much so that he had a yacht and he named it the Lady Ghislaine. A little bit ironic though, because Robert Maxwell was to go overboard on the Lady Ghislaine, and it's still not known to this day how he died. I did see in some of the documentaries and other news sources that I've reviewed that there is a correlation, or there may be a relation to him and some work done for government agencies, the CIA. So was it that he was the man that knew too much? Later on, it was discovered that there was a massive fraud associated with this business. I know a lot of his workers were robbed of their pension. I don't know if he was aware of impending doom on that front and it was a suicide attempt. And it could be a crime of passion or a murder. I remember when I first heard about that, and I knew what I knew about Ghislaine Maxwell and the crimes that she was allegedly committing with Jeffrey Epstein. I thought maybe she might have pushed her father overboard for some sort of inheritance or life insurance, but knowing what I know now, I don't think that's the case. And one of the first appearances I think Ghislaine ever made in front of the public that's recorded was her boarding the Lady Ghislaine when it was docked after the accident to provide a statement and address the press. And it was very apparent that she loved her father very much. And I have seen an interview, where she got quite emotional about that. One thing is for sure though, after his death, things did not go well for the Maxwell family. First, her brothers, or a few of her brothers, were accused of being in league with their father on that massive fraud that basically overnight bankrupted the company, compromised the livelihoods of the folks that supported and worked for those companies, And it was apparent pretty quickly that Ghislaine was not going to continue to enjoy the lifestyle she had as the favorite daughter of a publishing magnate in Robert Maxwell. So in 1991, Ghislaine Maxwell flew to the United States, and in 1991 approximately, she came into acquaintance with and formed a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. We know Jeffrey Epstein's a bit of a mystery. He was a math genius. He did work for a prestigious university. He did become a financial advisor on Wall Street. At one point, he hooked up with, or not hooked up with, but was linked up with Les Wexner of the Victoria's Secret fame. It's still a little shadowy, though, how he made his money. It has been speculated that a lot of it ended up coming from the blackmail he would obtain from the houses, resorts, and planes that he had heavily bugged, in which illegal activity supposedly occurred with some of the world's elite. So whether he had that information and gave someone an offer they couldn't refuse, which is give me what I want or lose your livelihood or ruin your reputation, maybe folks paid up, but that's speculation at this point. But one thing is clear, it wasn't long before Ghislaine was seen on the arm of Jeffrey Epstein at some of the hottest parties with some of the most important people in New York City and beyond. In fact, I've also seen pictures of both of them at Balmoral, which is the vacation residence, or one of the vacation residents of Queen Elizabeth II, and now I'm assuming King Charles, or maybe it was in the royal family for hundreds of years. One thing is known, there's definitely a picture of them enjoying their time on that estate. So they even had royal connections, and I think we know that based on the disgraced Prince Andrew, who had allegations levied against him by Virginia Giuffre, and that very, very famous, very public, very controversial, and sometimes disputed picture of him in Ghislaine's apartment with Jeffrey Epstein with Prince Andrew's arm around Virginia Giuffre. But in any event, we're getting off track a bit. Ghislaine Maxwell ended up being basically a right-hand man to Jeffrey Epstein and a bit of a fixer, and at some point, she must have learned about his peculiar habits, because it wasn't long before she became more of a procurer, at least based on the reports, based on the trial, based on the convictions, based on what I know, based on everything I've read and everything I've watched. There's even stories of Ghislaine circling parks, or Central Park in New York, for example, in a limo, telling the limo driver to stop because she found a nubile that would work for Jeffrey Epstein's unique tastes. We'll just leave it at that. She would quickly hop out of the car, befriend the girl, typically, based on what I've read, use a false pretense of being able to connect them with artists or being a talent scout who's trying to look for Victoria's Secret models. Imagine, you're a young girl walking through Central Park and you dream big, and all of a sudden a woman walks up to you and promises everything you ever wanted, right? What would you do? But the story really starts in Palm Beach. Jeffrey Epstein had a mansion on Palm Beach, and there's also West Palm Beach, which is the more rougher side of the tracks. And the way I understand it is Ghislaine was just one of, I think, a few, but the only convicted beyond Jeffrey Epstein, procurer of women for Epstein, would scout underage girls in West Palm Beach. And remember, that was the wrong side of the tracks. That was where girls are a bit more forgettable, a little less valuable, although they shouldn't be. All life is precious and valuable. But I think the thought was, they're from broken homes. No one's going to believe what they have to say. No one cares to even hear what they have to say. Let's get those girls from West Palm Beach and bring them over to Jeffrey's mansion. Ghislaine would supposedly do just that. And when they would come over, they'd be asked to give Jeffrey Epstein a massage. I think in some cases, the massages started innocently enough. Maybe they returned a couple times. And then there started to be some, essay or S-appropriate activities that took place. And girls would be paid, I think, $100 to $200 cash every time they came. And I think they even got the same or bonuses for recruiting new girls to bring over for Jeffrey's insatiable appetite. 2008, I believe, after some complaints from some parents or some relatives of some of those girls and some of the girls themselves in West Palm Beach, there was a criminal conviction of Jeffrey Epstein. There was a controversial sweetheart deal that he got that required him to go to prison and get some work release, and it really ended up turning into basic release with a little bit of time in prison. I think he spent more time released than he did in the big house. And as part of that deal, there was immunity for any possible co-conspirators that may have been involved. And I know I mentioned that Ghislaine Maxwell may have induced or was accused of and convicted of inducing girls to come to that Palm Beach mansion. So I think Ghislaine thought with that deal, and as long as Jeffrey Epstein kept his nose clean, she'd be able to move on from that chapter of her life as if nothing happened, and hopefully spend out her days as a rich right-hand lady to Jeffrey Epstein, and well-connected, and maybe even making other money through those connections. Who knows? I do know that she must have at some point felt the heat was coming back on the whole situation, because I don't know the exact year, she started something called the Terramar Project, and that was a project to basically save the ocean. And the premise behind it was you could kind of buy a little piece of the ocean. I'm not sure if it was a foot, 6 inches, 3 feet, an acre, I'm not sure. No one owns the ocean, right? And it was more symbolic than anything. But Ghislaine's point was, in donating and getting your certificate that you own a little piece of the ocean, you had a vested stake in making sure that we protected the Earth's most important resource, right? That charity has since been shuttered, but I think that had less to do with philanthropy, and this is my humble opinion, but less to do with philanthropy and more to do with running away from what happened down in Florida, running away from what still might have been going on, running away from the heat that was starting to come back to the case. And nonetheless, I think she was trying to rehabilitate her image a little bit. That wouldn't last long. Again, that charity shuttered its doors, and I think 2018, Jeffrey was back in police custody after being arrested at Teterboro Airport, and he was taken to the MCC, which is the Metropolitan Correctional Center, which is in Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken. And it was purported that he killed himself in jail. There's some controversy about that, that maybe someone went in as an inside job because, again, he was the man who knew too much, maybe like Robert Maxwell. He was scum, he's gone, that's all that matters, let's move on, right? So it's a conspiracy theory, not even worth worrying about. Let's just say he killed himself. That must have made Ghislaine feel pretty insecure, because she was person number 2, right? So they can't punish Jeffrey Epstein, he never went to trial. The best they can do is punish Ghislaine, and Ghislaine knew it. Ghislaine was vanished in thin air. The best I know, I think there was a picture taken of her at In-N-Out Burger, I think in LA, although I think that was proven to be a fake. I can't remember the name of the book she was reading. What eating was very weird. And I remember thinking it was very applicable to her situation, but I can't remember the name. And then she just basically vanished. There were some rumors that she lived, I think, in Manchester by the Sea with Scott Borgerson, who was her husband, who's now divorced from her. She ended up being found in New England in the middle of nowhere in an estate, ironically called Tucked Away. It turns out the FBI knew a lot more than they were letting on, for a lot longer than they were letting on. And when they found Ghislaine, they found her cell phone wrapped in foil. And she did make a run for it, although she made a run for it into a closet, so nomination for World's Dumbest Criminal. There's not many places to go once you're backed into a corner. So she was taken into custody, and believe it or not, she was in jail with her bail denied many times, and rightfully so. She had plenty of resources and money, and the judge knew that. So she was in MDC, which is similar to MCC, but in Brooklyn, and this jail is known to be hardcore. And I'm not talking because of the criminals that are necessarily roaming around, because Ghislaine spent most of her, if not all of her time, aside for preparing with lawyers, in solitary confinement. I'm talking about rough as in, you might not have heat in the wintertime. I'm talking about rough as in, who knows what's in that food. I mean rough as in, imagine being in your bathroom, an average sized bathroom, for 24 hours a day with someone shining a flashlight in your face every 15 minutes to make sure that you hadn't killed yourself. I actually remember thinking that some of the news reporting was a little strange, because they would say that she slept with the lights on. They were never turned off. If that's the case, I don't see why you would need to look in with a flashlight to make sure she was sleeping or that she was okay, but that's maybe another story for another day. She went to trial in 2021, 2022, and she was convicted. I believe there were either 3 or 4 abused or trafficked women who testified. One of them was one of the Farmer sisters. I think it was Annie Farmer, who testified by name. The others testified with anonymity. And Ghislaine was convicted. So that's basically Ghislaine's beginning to her sad ending, although I hear she's gotten mad respect from the other inmates at FCI Tallahassee for never rolling on her co-conspirators. She probably had an excellent opportunity to get some leniency with Jeffrey Epstein gone if she just opened her little black book, and snitches get stitches, and she knew it. She didn't talk, so I'm not saying I give her credit for it, but to be in those conditions and not break, something to be said for it. Let's get into it. So the first one is grandiosity with expectations of superior treatment by other people. I think Maxwell definitely demonstrated that. her family was almost left in ruin when she left the UK, but it wasn't very long and didn't take very much at all. And I'm sure she had plenty of connections to become a very prominent socialite, a very witty, charming, charismatic socialite on the New York party scene. And and I think she lived a life of privilege, right? I don't think you can come away from a life of privilege without some grandiosity that you're maybe more important than you really are, or that you're just a cut above the rest, right? And in fact, she was part of the 1%, even though she did stuff that the 99% or the majority of the 99% would never do. So I say I'm going to give her a yes for that one. For fixated on fantasies of power, success, intelligence, attractiveness, I think I'm going to give her a ding here too. I think Ghislaine Maxwell had an inflection point when her father died. The fraud charges, came out. The family was ruined. The business was ruined. To really decide what she wanted to do, she was Oxford educated. She was not dumb by any means. She did have connections, and I think she could have, like she did with her Terramar project later in life, maybe done something really meaningful with the knowledge and skills that she had, and still make a ton of money and live the life that she dreamed. But she bypassed all of that to do nothing more than fly to New York City and get herself on the arm of the first guy maybe that would notice. That's speculation on my part, but I mean, if you end up with Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, how hard did you try, right? So those fantasies of power and success drove her to fly to New York with no other plan than to get that lifestyle back. And she certainly did that with Jeffrey Epstein, although she would do a lot of crazy things and pay a heavy price to maintain that. Self-perception of being unique, superior, and associated with high-status people and institutions. Ghislaine Maxwell was extremely smart. She was Oxford educated, very charismatic at Oxford, very much the life of the party on the New York social scene. She was the person to be seen with. There's tons of pictures of her with the most powerful people in the world. I can't imagine that you wouldn't think you're a bit unique, superior, when you're associated with that many high status people. I mean, the number of folks that are still entertaining us today, innocent, of course, or have no charges levied, but just may have been at a party with her and wrapped their arm around her, got a picture. I've seen a ton of pictures. So, when you keep yourself in that circle, especially when she was going to have that Terramar charity later, if that was altruistic, then, I think that she probably would have put herself in a position where she didn't need to be perceived as unique and superior, spending time with only like-minded people. That altruism, if it was really there, probably would have put in the path of the disadvantage and really shown some humility on her part. So far, I would definitely give her the grandiosity for jumping on a plane to New York and basically recreating her life and then some after the death of her father and the implosion of his company. I think she was fixated on fantasies of power and success, especially given what she ended up doing later to maintain that. That self-perception of being unique or superior, she was only seen with the most powerful people. I don't think you could feel that you weren't more special than others, when you do something like that. Needing constant admiration from others, I almost want to give her a pass on this. She was definitely very smart. I think she could pilot a helicopter. I haven't heard very many anecdotes. I mean, she was naturally smart and witty, but I don't remember very many anecdotes with her expressing that she cared at all of what really people thought or whether they admired her. I think she just wanted a standard of living and would do some crazy things to get it. Certainly no one's admired what she's done. And I'm sure those in her inner circle that may have gotten a whiff of what she'd done certainly didn't admire her more for it. I think it was just a targeted move to maintain her status. So I'm going to scratch needing admiration from other people off the list. A sense of entitlement to special treatment. I mean, to have Jeffrey Epstein be convicted of what he was in 2008, be able to basically spend the majority of the day outside jail, to be named for Ghislaine in the case as immune from prosecution based on the sweetheart deal that was made, how could that not make you feel entitled? It certainly emboldened her, because that was just the tip of the iceberg as far as how far this trafficking, conspiracy went. I think it emboldened her. And I think, when you can get away with something that heinous, The charge that Jeffrey Epstein was actually convicted of was solicitation of prostitution. I think of a minor, just solicitation of a prostitute. They weren't prostitutes. They were young girls that were lured there with the promise of, education or success or even just a bit of money. They came from the wrong side of the tracks. They were, their families were trying to stay fed and housed, and they wanted to make sure they had nice things too. So, um, I just think as far as entitlement goes, uh, I think Ghislaine thought she was just going to be able to do whatever she wanted for forever. Every young girl, every woman, and their psyche and their life and their passions be damned, and that's pretty dramatic. The next one is exploitative of others to achieve personal gain. I feel like I can't even speak to this one. I mean, if you don't call jumping out of a limo, running up to a girl, positioning yourselves as a model scout for Victoria's Secret to lure her to Jeffrey Epstein's to fulfill his predilections, if you don't call that exploitation of others for personal gain, I don't know what you call it. I mean, I think that's probably the most pronounced symptom based on the DSM-5 that she demonstrated, and the lengths she went to maintain this lifestyle were just ridiculous. And next is unwilling to empathize with the feelings, wishes, and needs of other people. You're certainly not displaying empathy when you lead a young woman to a room and you know exactly what's going to happen in that room and they don't. Or they don't, you do, and you're in that room and also participating in it, right? She didn't care about these families. She didn't care about these victims. And we saw it in court. She did give a brief statement at her sentencing, admitted no guilt, and that's to be expected as she does have an appeal to win. But there were probably ways that she could have expressed her sorrow and her sorrow, and she must have done a ton of thinking in jail, and who knows what she thought about, or maybe she thinks she's still right, or she's so entitled that she's gonna get off anyway and just needed to bide her time. But there was just not even any empathy, and her statements online, and you can read it, it did acknowledge the pain of the victims, but almost as if it was some foreign pain and she was just some passive observer of it happening. And regardless of her appeal, she was just convicted, on counts, and these women had to relive this trauma and go in the courtroom and have to deal with it all over again. With her sitting stone-faced, I think at even one point, instead of getting on the stand to defend herself, and if she was innocent or if I was innocent of something that heinous, you better believe I'm going to be on the stand for that. She defiantly stood up and looked at the judge and said, I don't believe that the prosecution has shown, beyond a reasonable doubt that I've committed this. Therefore, there is no need for me to testify. Are you kidding me? There were 4 witnesses that took the stand that gave detailed, corroborated accounts of abuse. And you're going to stand up in court and say, this is a sham, the prosecution hasn't done their job, and there's not even really any reason to have this trial at all. That's very presumptuous, and that's the behavior of an entitled person. The other thing that I thought was very entitled, or very very indicative of how special she thought, or maybe it was just a legal maneuver. It could have been, I think it was a little bit of both. But when the jury goes to deliberate, they're given jury instructions, and typically the person on trial is referred to as the defendant. So when I covered Elizabeth Holmes, and actually, I lied. Maybe I have to go back and look at her indictment. But typically it would say the defendant is accused of this. The defendant is accused of this. This will happen to the defendant. There was actually a motion filed by Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys to make sure she was called Miss Maxwell in the documents, as if she was too important to be even called the defendant. And I think it was an attempt to humanize her a bit. How the hell you humanize Ghislaine Maxwell after everything these jurors saw, that's a whole nother story. But I just feel like there is that sense of entitlement there that, I'm so important that my jury instructions need to be better than the common criminals, or I have to even be, name dropped in that. I just thought it was absurd. I thought it was ridiculous. And finally, we come to intensely envious of others and thinking people are intensely envious of her. I think she would have been more envious had she not gotten the language she came for in New York City, so I'm going to give her a pass on that one. And pompous and arrogant demeanor. I mean, she's actually also up for a perjury trial for flagrant misstatements she made under deposition and a lawsuit. And I think there were even accounts of her slamming her hand down on the table a few times in anger for even having to be there and being asked the questions that she was. That says arrogant and pompous to me. So there you have it. That's Ghislaine Maxwell, accused of S trafficking, accused of conspiracy for S trafficking, came from one of the richest families in the United Kingdom in the world, flew overseas, met Jeffrey Epstein, recreated the life that she wanted, and would do anything to keep that life. The cost of the human psyche or the people, at stake be damned. And for that reason, let's run down our list and just say there was some grandiosity there. Those fantasies of power motivated her. She did have a perception that she was a bit more unique and special than others, at least those young girls in West Palm Beach. Definitely a sense of entitlement to special treatment, given the anecdote about her name being in the jury instructions, her thinking she was immune from prosecution from the 2008 sweetheart deal. The one I don't think we covered, or we did, exploitative of others to achieve personal gain. That's the heart of the case. I'm willing to empathize. There was no empathy there. I don't think empathy has any place in this trial, or anybody even close to her, Jeffrey Epstein, or anybody else employed in that household has anything resembling empathy, at least the actual active conspiracy members. We're going to give her a pass on, envious, and we're definitely going to call her pompous and arrogant. 7 behaviors, so 7 out of 9. I'm sure you probably didn't expect me to say that Ghislaine Maxwell didn't have a place on the spectrum for narcissistic personality disorder. Does she really have it? We'll leave that up to the psychiatrists and the doctors. For now, we are just speculating. I can tell you this, though, like I said about Elizabeth Holmes, with 20 years in FCI Tallahassee, Ghislaine has plenty of time to parse through that, work with the mental health professionals, get honest with herself, and figure that out. I hope in discussing this case, we got to see narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder run amok. And I look forward to additional videos in the series about us and how we cope, and then also my continued series on I'm a Narc, Get Me Out of Here. For now, survivors, thrivers, hopefully subscribers, stay up.